The unexpected sound, 800 words. It was a quiet day in the command center of the Deathworlder fleet. The officers sat at their stations, their eyes scanning the vast reaches of space. The stars twinkled in the distance, seemingly peaceful. Yet there was an air of tension. The crew knew something was wrong. They had received a mysterious signal, a call for help from a distant alien world. Captain Harris paced back and forth in front of the command console. His mind raced with possibilities. The aliens had sounded desperate, but there was something unsettling about the message. It wasn't just a call for help. It felt like a warning. But why would an alien species reach out to humanity, especially to the Deathworlders, a race known for their brutal and savage ways? The soft hum of the command center was interrupted by the sudden burst of static from the communication system. The officers froze, all eyes turning toward the screen. The signal had become clearer, and now it was almost loud enough to drown out the hum of the ship. Something was definitely wrong. "Captain," Lieutenant Juno spoke up, her voice calm but strained. "The signal. It's coming from an uncharted planet in the outskirts of the galaxy. We've never detected any signs of intelligent life in that sector." Harris stood still, staring at the screen. The image flickered as the transmission grew stronger. A figure appeared on the screen, a being of unknown origin. The alien's face was distorted by the transmission, but the desperation in its eyes was unmistakable. "We need help," the alien's voice crackled through the speakers. "We are under attack by a force we cannot comprehend. Only Deathworlders can stop them." The word sent a chill through the entire room. Why would the alien mention Deathworlders specifically? Who knew about them outside of humanity? And why would they be the ones chosen to save this alien race? It didn't make sense. Captain Harris stepped forward. His fingers hovered over the control panel. The signal had a strange, almost eerie quality to it, like it was meant to be heard only by certain ears. He glanced at his crew. Lieutenant Juno, Sergeant Yates, and the rest of the team waited for his decision. They were all seasoned soldiers, but this was different. This wasn't just another mission. "Prepare the fleet," Harris ordered, his voice steady despite the unease in his chest. "We're going in." As the orders were relayed to the rest of the fleet, Harris couldn't shake the feeling that something far more sinister was at play. The alien had begged for help, but what exactly were they up against? Harris had faced countless threats in his career, but this one felt different. The unknown was always the most dangerous. The fleet slowly shifted course, heading toward the coordinates provided by the mysterious signal. As they entered the alien sector, the stars around them seemed to grow dimmer. The ship's sensors couldn't pick up any signs of life, just emptiness. Then, as they neared the planet, a sudden sound filled the ship, a low, haunting hum that seemed to come from the very depths of space itself. It wasn't like anything the Deathworlders had ever heard before. It was almost like a warning, or a call to something beyond their understanding. "Captain, we've detected something," Lieutenant Juno said, her voice tight with anxiety. "There's a massive energy spike coming from the planet's surface." Harris quickly walked to the console, his eyes scanning the readings. The energy signature was unlike anything they had encountered. It was ancient, powerful, and unmistakably alien. "Could it be the signal we received?" Yates asked, his voice low, filled with concern. "It's more than just that," Harris replied, his mind racing. "We're not dealing with a simple distress call. There's something else. Something hidden beneath the surface of that planet." As the fleet descended into the planet's atmosphere, the strange humming sound grew louder. It seemed to reverberate through the ship, echoing in the very walls. Harris couldn't help but feel that they were being drawn into something much larger than they could imagine. The planet below looked desolate, a barren landscape of cracked earth and dying forests. But there were signs of life, too. Strange structures, half destroyed, yet strangely intact, rose from the ground like ancient monuments. It was as if the planet had been abandoned long ago, yet something remained. "Prepare to land," Harris ordered, His voice was firm, but the tension in his gut was growing by the second. The hum from the planet had now become deafening, and it was clear that whatever was down there was waiting for them. The fleet's ships landed on the planet's surface with precision, their engines humming softly as they touched down. The ground was uneven, and the sky was clouded, casting an eerie pallor over the landscape. As the Deathworlder soldiers disembarked, the air was thick with unease. The strange humming seemed to pulse through the ground itself, vibrating in their bones. Harris surveyed the surroundings, his instincts on high alert. He could feel it. Something was watching them. Something powerful. Something ancient. "Stay alert," Harris commanded. "We don't know what we're dealing with." As they moved forward, the soldiers' weapons were raised, their senses sharpened. Each step they took was measured, every sound amplified by the eerie hum that filled the air. It felt as though the very atmosphere was alive, watching, waiting for something to happen. And then, without warning, the ground trembled. A sudden, violent shake threw everyone off balance. The humming stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. The soldiers looked around, confusion and fear written on their faces. In the distance, something massive rose from the ground. A shadow. A shape. It was not something natural. This was something created. Something alien. Harris's heart raced. He knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The Deathworlders had arrived, but they were about to face an enemy like no other. The unknown force. 800 words. The ground continued to tremble beneath their feet as the massive shape slowly emerged from the depths of the planet's surface. The Deathworlder soldiers, hardened and battle-tested, stood frozen in disbelief. What they saw before them was like nothing they had ever encountered. A towering structure, like an ancient temple or fortress, had risen from the ground. It was covered in strange, glowing symbols that pulsed with an eerie light. The air around it felt heavy, charged with an unnatural energy that seemed to twist and warp the space around it. The soldiers raised their weapons, their hearts pounding in their chests. Captain Harris was the first to regain his composure. His instincts screamed at him to get his team back to the ships, to retreat, but something deep within him told him that turning away wasn't an option. The alien race that had called for help was depending on them, and there was no turning back. "Stay sharp," Harris commanded, his voice firm and authoritative. "We don't know what this is, but we're not leaving until we find out." As the Deathworlders cautiously advanced toward the strange structure, the air around them seemed to grow colder. The hum that had filled the atmosphere before had stopped, leaving only a deafening silence. The soldiers exchanged nervous glances, each one feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. Sergeant Yates, a veteran of countless campaigns, was the next to speak. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "This place doesn't feel right, Captain. It's like the ground itself is watching us." Harris nodded, his eyes scanning the structure. It was ancient. There was no doubt about that. But the way it had risen from the earth, the way it seemed to pulse with dark energy, was beyond anything they had ever encountered. It wasn't just a relic of an old civilization. It was something alive. "We need to keep moving," Harris said, trying to push the growing sense of dread from his mind. "Get to the entrance. We'll find out what's inside." The team moved forward, cautiously. Each step felt like a test, like the planet itself was daring them to continue. As they neared the entrance of the structure, the glowing symbols on the walls began to shift, rearranging themselves into new patterns. The light from the symbols flickered, casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to move on their own. Lieutenant Juno, the fleet's communications officer, was the first to notice something strange. Her eyes widened in alarm as she pointed toward the entrance. "Captain, look." At the doorway, a figure stood, an alien just like the one they had seen in the transmission. But this one was different. It was tall, thin, and covered in shimmering armor that seemed to reflect the dim light in an unnatural way. Its eyes glowed, faintly, like two tiny suns. "We are glad you came," the alien said, its voice cold and distant. The tone was not the same as the desperate plea they had heard earlier. It was calm, almost as if it was rehearsed. "But your arrival may be too late." Harris stepped forward, his hand raised in a gesture to pause his team. "We came because you asked for help. Tell us what's going on. What is this place?" The alien's eyes flickered with what seemed like amusement. "This is the Nexus. It is both a place and a weapon. A weapon that has the power to destroy worlds. It is a power you cannot comprehend." The words hung in the air like a warning, and the soldiers braced themselves for what was to come. But Harris refused to back down. The aliens had called for help, and they would not abandon them now. "We'll find a way to stop whatever is coming," Harris said, his voice steady. "We've faced worse than this." The alien tilted its head slightly, as if considering Harris's words. "You do not understand. The force that threatens this world is beyond your capacity to fight. It is already here." Before Harris could respond, the ground trembled again, this time more violently. The air became thick with a low, rumbling growl. The soldiers instinctively raised their weapons, their eyes scanning the surroundings. From the shadows of the structure, something began to move. A shape, monstrous and terrifying, took form. It was enormous, a being of pure darkness, its body shifting like smoke, its eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. Its form was impossible to define, constantly shifting, changing. It wasn't just a creature. It was a force of destruction, a living nightmare that defied logic. "This is the enemy," the alien said, its voice now laced with fear. "This is what you face." The Deathworlders stood their ground, their weapons raised, ready for anything. But even they could feel the immense power radiating from the creature. It was unlike anything they had ever fought. This wasn't just a war. It was a battle for survival, not just for them, but for the entire galaxy. Captain Harris's mind raced as he tried to formulate a plan. They had faced countless enemies, but this was something different, something more ancient and dangerous than they had ever encountered. And it was clear that this creature, this force, was only the beginning. "We need to get back to the ships," Harris ordered, his voice firm, though his heart pounded in his chest. "We need to warn the fleet." But as the Deathworlders turned to retreat, the creature unleashed a roar that shook the very foundation of the planet. The ground cracked beneath their feet, and the sky above seemed to split open, revealing a vast, endless void. Harris's mind spun with questions, but there was no time for answers. The fight had already begun, and they were all part of it now. The Deathworlders had come to answer a call for help, but now they were facing an enemy far greater than they could have imagined, and the fate of this alien world rested in their hands. The unseen power, 800 words. The world around them was disintegrating. The Deathworlders stood frozen, facing the monstrous entity that had risen from the heart of the planet. The ground beneath their feet rumbled as if the very earth was alive, shuddering with every step the creature took. Its dark form swirled like smoke, twisting in ways that defied nature. There was no clear shape to it, just a void of darkness that moved like a predator, intent on consuming everything in its path. Captain Harris's pulse quickened. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This wasn't just another hostile force they could overpower with brute strength and superior tactics. This was something far worse, a force beyond understanding, an ancient power that had been waiting for the right moment to strike. "Captain, what do we do?" Sergeant Yates's voice was strained as he clutched his rifle, his eyes locked on the shifting mass of darkness. He had faced every kind of enemy imaginable, but this was different. The sheer power radiating from the creature felt like it was pushing them back, forcing them to stay rooted in place. Harris's mind raced. They had no idea what this thing was or where it had come from. All they knew was that the alien race that had called for help had led them right into the jaws of this nightmare. The alien beside them, its tall, shimmering form barely visible in the dim light, didn't seem to be able to offer any real help. The fear in its eyes was unmistakable. It had been waiting for this moment, but now that it had arrived, it seemed just as helpless as the Deathworlders. "This is the Nexus," the alien whispered again, as though the words held some sort of explanation. "A weapon of unimaginable power. It is more than a mere creature. It is a catalyst, a harbinger of the end." The words sent a chill down Harris's spine. The Nexus. The idea of it being both a weapon and a creature was incomprehensible, but there was no time for questioning now. The creature, or whatever it was advancing toward them with terrifying speed. "Stay focused," Harris snapped. "We need to regroup, get to the higher ground. We have to find a way to stop it." But as they began to move, the ground beneath them cracked open, sending large chunks of rock tumbling down into the void below. The creature roared again, its voice reverberating through the air like thunder. The entire world seemed to be shaking with its fury. "Captain," Lieutenant Juno called out, pointing toward the sky. "Look!" Harris looked up, his heart sinking. From the black clouds overhead, more shapes were descending. Countless smaller creatures, each one resembling the darkness of the Nexus, but smaller and more agile. They were like shadows, each one moving with incredible speed, darting through the sky like hunters seeking prey. "We're surrounded," Sergeant Yates muttered, his voice low with disbelief. The Deathworlders had faced battles on countless worlds, but this felt different. The sheer scale of the enemy they were up against made it seem like survival was no longer an option. "Fall back," Harris ordered, his voice steady despite the rising panic in his chest. "We need to regroup and plan our next move. We can't fight them like this." But as they tried to retreat, the Nexus shifted again. The dark figure seemed to stretch and ripple, its form expanding as though it was consuming the very air around them. The smaller creatures followed its lead, their movements faster and more erratic, closing in on the Deathworlders from all sides. Captain Harris's mind raced. There was no way they could fight this creature with traditional weapons. They needed something more. They needed to understand what they were facing before it was too late. And the clock was ticking. "Hold the line," Harris shouted. "We can't afford to let them push us back any further." The Deathworlders formed a perimeter, their weapons raised, but even their strongest attacks seemed to have little effect. The creature absorbed the blasts, its form rippling as though they were nothing more than harmless sparks. The smaller creatures darted in and out of their line of defense, striking with deadly precision before vanishing back into the shadows. "This isn't working," Juno said, frustration creeping into her voice. "We need to know what we're dealing with." Harris glanced back at the alien. It was standing at the edge of the battlefield, its glowing eyes fixed on the chaos unfolding before them. "You know something," Harris said, his voice urgent. "Tell me what we're up against. How do we stop this?" The alien's voice trembled as it spoke. "There is no stopping the Nexus. It cannot be destroyed. It cannot be defeated by conventional means. The only way to stop it is to find its core, the heart of its power. But that is not something you can do with weapons. You must reach it before it reaches its full potential." "Where is the core?" Harris demanded. The alien hesitated. "The core is hidden, deep within the Nexus itself. You must find it, or this world will fall. And the Nexus will continue to spread, across galaxies, across the universe, until there is nothing left." Harris's mind whirled with the implications. They didn't just need to fight. They needed to find the heart of the enemy and destroy it before it was too late. But with the Nexus growing stronger by the second, time was running out. The battle had only just begun, and already the odds were stacked against them. "All right," Harris said, his jaw clenched. "We move fast. We move smart. We're getting to that core." The Deathworlders gathered their strength, preparing for the most dangerous mission they had ever faced. The survival of the alien world, and perhaps the entire galaxy, now rested on their shoulders, and they would not back down. Into the heart of the beast, 800 words. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the Deathworlder fleet pushed forward, a united force of humanity's finest warriors. With the Nexus rapidly consuming the planet, they had no choice but to press deeper into its chaotic core. The sky above them was a swirl of dark clouds, a thick blanket of smoke and lightning, reflecting the monstrous energy of the creature that had been awakened. Captain Harris and his team moved swiftly through the broken terrain. The rocky surface was jagged and unstable, as though the world itself was collapsing. Their steps were heavy, but determined. The Nexus loomed ahead, its presence a palpable force in the air, pushing against their every move, slowing their progress. "We can't keep this up much longer," Sergeant Yates said, his voice strained with exhaustion. "The longer we stay exposed, the more vulnerable we become." Harris nodded, but his focus remained locked ahead. They had a mission, and failure wasn't an option. They had to find the core. They had to destroy it before the Nexus consumed everything in its path. The fate of entire civilizations rested on their shoulders. The alien that had guided them up to this point remained at the back of their group, its tall, glowing form flickering in the shadow of the destruction around them. Despite the alien's earlier warnings, it still hadn't told them exactly where to find the core, only that they had to go deeper. The creature was as much a mystery to them as the Nexus itself. "We're getting close," the alien said, its voice almost lost beneath the roaring winds. "But the Nexus is aware of your presence now. It knows you're coming for its heart." Harris's gaze hardened. "We've come too far to stop now." They pressed on, moving past broken structures and shattered earth. The terrain grew more surreal with each step. Strange, twisted formations of rock and crystal rose up from the ground, pulsating with energy. It was as though the planet itself was being remade by the Nexus. Everything they had known about the world had changed, and nothing was as it seemed. "We've got movement," Lieutenant Juno shouted, pointing ahead. A group of smaller Nexus creatures emerged from the shadows, their dark forms darting towards them at lightning speed. They were like shadows, impossible to track, their bodies weaving in and out of existence. They were an army of chaos, a swarm of madness that had no true form. "Form a defensive perimeter," Harris ordered, raising his rifle. The team immediately fell into position, their backs against each other, eyes scanning the surroundings. The first wave of Nexus creatures lunged forward, their bodies stretching unnaturally long, their limbs shifting like serpents. They struck with ferocity, each one targeting the Deathworlder. But these warriors had faced worse. Sergeant Yates fired his pulse rifle, the blasts tearing through the air, taking down one of the creatures. It screamed, a high-pitched, inhuman wail, before disintegrating into black smoke. But the creatures kept coming. Another swarm emerged, moving as one, surrounding them from all sides. The Deathworlders fought back, their weapons relentless, their movements precise. But the creatures seemed to multiply with every shot fired, their dark energy coiling and shifting, as if the Nexus itself was feeding them. "This is never ending," Sergeant Yates shouted. "They just keep coming." Harris's heart raced as he scanned the battlefield. There had to be a way out of this. He couldn't afford to waste time with these monsters. They had to get to the core. "We need to move," Harris said, his voice tight with urgency. "We're not here to fight these things. We're here to end it all. Get to the center. Now." With a single coordinated move, the Deathworlders began to push forward, making their way through the chaos. Their weapons fired in rapid bursts, cutting down the Nexus creatures as they went. But despite their might, the creatures kept closing in, their dark forms stretching into every corner, making it feel like the very air was trying to choke them. As they continued, the earth beneath them began to shift, creating a series of deep, jagged chasms. The ground cracked open with every step, the planet seemingly splitting apart. Harris's eyes flicked to the alien who had been guiding them, his expression tense. "The core is near," the alien said, its voice strained. "But you must hurry." The Nexus is already preparing to unleash its full force. Harris's grip tightened on his rifle. We're not stopping until we reach it. The team continued, relentlessly pushing forward as the world around them seemed to fall apart. The Nexus was everywhere now, twisting the landscape, bending reality. But despite the overwhelming odds, Harris felt a surge of hope. He couldn't explain it, but deep down, he knew they were close. They were getting closer to the core, the heart of the creature that had consumed the planet. And they would stop it, no matter what it took. Ahead, a massive structure began to emerge from the darkness. It was an ancient temple, built into the heart of the Nexus itself. Its architecture was unlike anything Harris had ever seen. Twisted, organic, as though it had grown out of the planet itself. An extension of the very power they were trying to destroy. "This is it," the alien said, its voice barely a whisper. "The core lies within." Harris's heart raced. They had found it. They had found the heart of the beast, but they weren't alone. As they stepped closer to the temple, a low rumble echoed through the air. The Nexus was waiting for them, and it wasn't going to let them destroy its heart without a fight. The final battle was about to begin. The final stand, 800 words. The air was thick with tension as the Deathworlder team advanced toward the dark temple that loomed in front of them. The Nexus, like a ravenous beast, was preparing to unleash its final defense. The ground shook beneath their boots, sending clouds of dust swirling into the already chaotic atmosphere. They were inside the heart of the storm now. No turning back. Captain Harris scanned the area, every sense on high alert. The temple's twisted architecture, made from dark, organic material, stood like an ancient monument to destruction. It pulsed with energy, a deep, rhythmic beat that seemed to resonate through the air itself. The sound was both a warning and a challenge. "This is it," Harris said, his voice steady but tight. "We need to place the explosives at the core and get out before it detonates. Make it quick, make it clean." His words were simple, but the weight of the task ahead was heavy on them all. The Nexus had already done more damage than they could count, and it wasn't about to give up without a fight. "Cover me while I set the charge," Lieutenant Juno ordered. "The rest of you, find cover, and be ready to engage if things go south." The team split up, their movements swift and practiced. Each one knew their role. They had been trained for this. But the closer they got to the heart of the Nexus, the more it felt like the very air was turning against them. The temperature dropped, and the ground beneath them trembled with increasing intensity. Suddenly, a loud, echoing roar reverberated through the temple. The walls seemed to writhe, as though alive, reacting to the destruction of their sacred ground. It was then that the creatures appeared. Massive, twisted forms, like shadows given life, began to emerge from the very walls of the temple. Their eyes glowed with malevolent energy, and their bodies rippled with dark, unnatural power. The Deathworlders had faced these creatures before, but now they were stronger, more numerous, and relentless. "Here they come," Sergeant Yates shouted, his pulse rifle already aimed and ready. The first wave of creatures charged forward, their bodies stretching and morphing in ways that defied logic. They moved like liquid shadows, impossible to track, impossible to kill. "Focus fire," Harris ordered, raising his own rifle. "We need to clear a path." The Deathworlders opened fire, their weapons tearing into the creatures with deadly precision. Each shot struck true, but the creatures kept coming, seemingly unfazed by the onslaught. They were too many, and the deeper the Deathworlders pushed into the temple, the more the Nexus seemed to draw upon its energy to protect itself. Explosions rocked the walls as the creatures exploded into dark vapor, but more replaced them, pushing the team back. Each blast of energy from the Nexus temple caused the ground to buckle beneath their feet. The battle had escalated from a fight for survival to a desperate race against time. Lieutenant Juno's voice rang out from across the battlefield. "Charge is almost set. Just hold on a little longer." Harris nodded. He had no choice but to trust his team. They had trained for situations like this, where everything would seem to go wrong, where every step forward was met with overwhelming resistance. But even as they fought, Harris couldn't help but notice the growing darkness around them. The walls of the temple seemed to pulse with energy, and the air became thick with an unnatural presence, as though the Nexus itself was alive and aware of their every move. And then it happened. A massive explosion shook the temple. A deafening roar filled the air. And for a moment, everything went still. The Deathworlders, caught off guard, were thrown to the ground by the force of the blast. Harris's head spun, and the world around him seemed to dissolve into smoke and ash. The ground rumbled beneath him as if the planet itself was coming apart at the seams. When he regained his senses, he saw what had caused the explosion. A colossal creature, its body cloaked in shifting darkness, had emerged from the heart of the Nexus. It was the embodiment of the entity they had been fighting, the beast at the center of the storm. Its eyes were like burning coals, and its massive claws tore into the earth as it rose from the depths of the temple. "This is it," Harris whispered to himself. "The final challenge." The Deathworlders were outnumbered, exhausted, and on the brink of collapse. The Nexus had unleashed its full power, and there was no more hiding, no more running. They had no choice but to stand and fight. "Fall back," Harris shouted, rallying his team. "Get to the center. We have to destroy it before it destroys us." The Deathworlders regrouped, their formation tight as they retreated toward the core. The colossal creature loomed behind them, its every step causing the temple to shudder. They could feel the raw power of the Nexus pressing in from all sides, its energy suffocating them. Sergeant Yates unleashed another burst of fire, but it did nothing to slow the creature's approach. They had only one option left. Harris moved swiftly toward the heart of the temple, where Juno was setting the final charge. But the closer they got, the more intense the resistance became. The creature was right behind them, its claws reaching out, hungry for destruction. Harris's heart raced. They had come so far, fought so hard. But now, in this final moment, they were facing the ultimate test. Would they make it out in time to destroy the Nexus, or would they be consumed by the very monster they had come to defeat? The team, battered and exhausted, gathered around him. There was no more room for hesitation. Their lives, the lives of countless others, depended on what they did next. The massive creature behind them was the final obstacle. They had to destroy the Nexus core and get out, no matter the cost. Harris's pulse quickened as he looked at the temple's core, pulsing with dark energy. It was now or never. The charge had to be set. With a deep breath, he nodded to Juno. "Do it." Juno didn't hesitate. She slammed her hand down on the detonator. The core erupted in a wave of blinding light, sending shockwaves through the temple. The explosion sent the Deathworlders flying, the force knocking them off their feet. The temple began to shake violently, the walls cracking and crumbling. As the creature howled in rage, the temple itself started to collapse. But it was too late. The Nexus had been destroyed. "We did it," Harris breathed, his voice shaking with relief and exhaustion. But the battle wasn't over yet. The Deathworlders still had to escape. The temple was coming apart, and they had moments before it was lost entirely. "We move, now," Harris barked, rallying the team. "Out the exit, or we die here." The Deathworlders sprinted toward the exit, their hearts pounding, the walls of the temple crumbling around them. Would they make it out in time? The answer was yet to come. Escape and aftermath. 800 words. The earth beneath the Deathworlders' boots was shaking, as if the very heart of the planet was being torn apart. The explosion from the Nexus core had sent shockwaves through the temple, collapsing its once impenetrable walls. Dust and debris filled the air, the acrid smell of burnt metal and sulfur thick in their lungs. They could hear the roar of the colossal creature behind them, its frustration echoing through the ruins as it continued to thrash in vain. The Nexus was no more, But the Deathworlders weren't out of danger yet. "Move faster," Harris shouted, his voice a low growl beneath the chaos. "We don't have much time before the whole place comes down." The team ran as fast as they could, their legs burning from exhaustion, their weapons clutched tightly in their hands. Each step was a race against time as they sprinted toward the exit. The temple groaned, its stone walls buckling under the strain of the damage. The path ahead was becoming increasingly unstable, chunks of rock falling from above, threatening to crush them at any moment. Harris glanced over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the massive creature, still thrashing in the wreckage. It was not about to give up. But they had no choice. They had to escape. There was no time for second chances. "Juno, where's the exit?" Harris called out to his second-in-command, his voice rising above the cacophony of collapsing stone and roaring beasts. Juno, sweat dripping down her face, pointed toward the cracked doorway ahead. "It's just ahead. We're almost there." But as they neared the exit, the ground beneath them shifted violently, sending Harris stumbling. He caught himself on a crumbling pillar, his heart hammering in his chest. The sound of collapsing stone was deafening, and the air was thick with dust. The world around them was falling apart, but they couldn't stop now. The creature was relentless. Despite the destruction of the Nexus, it seemed to have no intention of letting them escape. With one final guttural roar, it charged through the crumbling walls, its claws scraping against the ground as it lunged toward them. The Deathworlders' hearts pounded in their chests. There was no way to outrun it. Their only chance now was to outsmart it. "Keep moving," Harris ordered, his voice grim. Juno and the others broke through the final barrier of rubble and sprinted into the open, the temple's exit in sight. They were so close. The sun's light greeted them, and for a moment, it seemed like salvation. But the creature was still coming, its monstrous form gaining on them. Harris's mind raced. The only way to stop the creature, for good, was to make sure it didn't follow them outside. But that meant taking the huge risk. He turned to Juno. "Juno, you know what to do. Set the secondary charges now," he said, his voice steady despite the danger. "We can't let it follow us out of here." Juno nodded without hesitation, understanding the gravity of the situation. She reached for the detonator, her fingers shaking slightly. The secondary charges were designed to destroy the entrance, the only way to make sure the creature couldn't pursue them. But it was a dangerous gamble, if they didn't make it out in time. But there was no other choice. "On my mark," Harris said, looking to his team. They needed to time this perfectly. The creature was close now, its claws scraping against the stone. It was only moments away from bursting through the entrance. "Now, Juno." With a grim look in her eyes, Juno pressed the button, and the world erupted in a burst of light. The explosion tore through the entrance with incredible force, sending shockwaves through the ground. The temple structure collapsed behind them in a deafening roar. The Deathworlders were thrown forward, and Harris felt himself hit the ground with a hard thud. The sound of the creature's final roar was drowned out by the earth-shattering blast. For a moment, everything was still. The dust settled, the echoes of the explosion fading into silence. Harris struggled to his feet, his head spinning from the force of the blast. "Is everyone all right?" he called, his voice hoarse as he scanned the team. One by one, his team members stood up, battered but alive. Sergeant Yates gave a grim thumbs up, while Lieutenant Juno's eyes were narrowed in focus, assessing their surroundings. They had made it, but there was no time to waste. "We need to move," Harris said. "The area's still unstable." The Deathworlders made their way quickly to the extraction point, avoiding the collapsing structures around them. As they reached the safety of their ship, Harris allowed himself a moment of relief. They had completed the mission, and more importantly, they had survived. As the ship's engines roared to life and lifted them into the air, Harris couldn't help but look back at the destroyed temple below. The Nexus was no more. The alien worlds they had sworn to protect would have a chance to rebuild, to heal. But Harris knew the fight wasn't over. They had defeated one enemy, but the universe was vast, and there would be more battles to come. "We did it," Juno said quietly, her eyes on the horizon. But at what cost? Harris didn't have an answer. All he could do was stare at the stars, knowing that the Deathworlders would always be there, ready to face whatever came next. The universe was a dangerous place, but humanity's Deathworlders would always rise to the challenge.